Are you walking past gold? Are you just ignoring things that you could get more gold? I mean, you work hard, you're out there digging or metal detecting or whatever, and maybe your back is hurting you, and maybe your feet, or maybe if you're swinging a detector, your arm's bothering you, and you look and your vial is pretty much empty, or maybe you just have a few specks of gold in there. Well, you want to do better, but what's the problem? Maybe you've been at this for years and you're saying to yourself, I used to get a lot more gold than I get now. I hardly get anything. Well, what's the problem? Maybe you're thinking, my luck is all run out. Well, what if I told you it really isn't about luck? That finding gold is not some kind of magical, inscrutable thing that just happens to be lucky people find it. No, there's a science to finding gold. And if you get the science right, the whole situation is going to change for you. And the problem that I see with most guys is they're making a certain number of systematic mistakes. Things that they're doing that are just wrong, and they're going to cost you gold. You're going to be digging over here and getting a couple of specks, when if you were digging over here, you'd be getting grams and doing well. And so, you got to be doing the right things and not making mistakes. Look, I've done this for years. I've been prospecting for many decades, got a degree in mining engineering, written a book. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I've made a lot of mistakes myself and learned from them, and I've watched other people make mistakes, and I've learned from their mistakes too. So let's dig in and let me go through with you 10 mistakes that if you're doing them, they're costing you gold, and you don't want to do them. And so we're going to dig in and go through all these mistakes and how to fix that so that you can get out and find more gold starting today. The number one most common mistakes that people make is this one. Sampling's unnecessary. We don't need to sample. We know it's rich, and sampling's unnecessary because wherever I dig, I'm going to get about the same amount of gold. It doesn't make any difference. If I want to get more gold, I'm going to have to process more material. If I run 10 buckets through my sluice box, I'm going to get so much. If I run 20, I'm going to get twice that much. So sampling doesn't make any difference. I don't bother with it. And I got to tell you, that's the number one mistake that costs most guys the most gold. The truth is, in every gold deposit, you name it, the gold deposits are never just totally uniform, unless they're totally uniform with virtually no gold. That's the one way you can get uniform. In places where there is gold, you'll have good spots here and way more not good spots. And so you want to be working in the spot that's good, not in the way more not good spots. It's a thing, and sampling is work. And a lot of guys are willing to pick a spot and just dig right there and never sample around, because sampling and testing is work. And years ago I met a guy. I was out and I came across him. He was in Nevada, and he was setting up a placer plant. And I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. I'll talk to this guy. And he was willing to talk to me. So I went up there, and he'd bought a used bulldozer, a used front end loader, a used truck, and a nice Gardner Denver placer plant. And he set it up, and he was getting ready to run it. And I said, well, how'd you come upon it? And he had bought the property. And I found out from talking to him that he had sold his house in the San Francisco Bay Area to get the money to buy all this equipment. And I thought, wow, you've done a lot of sampling in this area? He says, no, we haven't done any sampling. We know it's rich. and I remember thinking to myself, this guy is in for a big surprise. And a few months later, I came back by there, and this is probably 6 months later. I came back by there, and he was gone. His equipment was still there, but he and his sons, he'd went out there with a couple of his sons, and there was no hiding. It was clear looking at the place, nobody had been there in weeks and weeks. And so I was there looking around and thinking, whoa, what about this? And some guy came by on the road and saw me there, said, hey, you're looking for old so-and-so? And I said, yeah, I talked to him a few months ago, and I don't know, where's he now? And this other guy knew him and knew the story. And the story was the guy had spent 3 months with his sons digging there and probably hoping that he was going to get down to, an area on bedrock that was rich, or strike a pocket or some rich crevice or something. Anyway, he and his sons had worked 3 months, and this is with a front end loader and a bulldozer and a placer plant. They weren't just shoveling stuff in. They were picking big, front end loader shovelfuls and putting it in and working yards and yards. And in 3 months, they managed to produce 3 ounces of gold. And, that was hardly enough to pay for their diesel, let alone to be paying them back for their investment in equipment and stuff like that. And so that's the thing I want to teach you guys. Always sample. When you go to an area, pick out the best area, but take a sample and see if it's good. If it's not up to snuff, pick another area and sample that and see if it's up to snuff. And if not, then pick another area and keep sampling, because you'll do more if you find a spot that's good. You'll do so much better that it will be well worth your time investment to sample and find the good spots and go there. And then the same thing works with metal detectors. If you go around, because you're wandering around with a metal detector is a form of sampling. If you find an area that's good with your metal detector, stay there. Hit that spot. Beat it to death until it gives up. Because oftentimes, if there's a situation that there's gold there, there's going to be more than one. Whatever the geologic or other occurrence that caused there to be a nugget there, there's likely to be more nuggets in that same area. And so, they're called patches if you're metal detecting. But whether it's the old timers just didn't clean that area off good enough, or, it's just a geologic spot where the geology and placer geology of everything put more gold there, beat those spots to death. But then when they're done, move on and find another one. So sample, sample, sample. Sampling is necessary, and whether you think it's rich or not, the sampling has to prove it. So let's take a look at our next mistake that cost people gold. And that second mistake is that gold is always on the bedrock. Now, you're going to say, well, Chris, gold is often on bedrock, and I totally agree, but it isn't always on bedrock. And there's a lot of reasons why this is. I can give you an example of a situation. I used to dredge in California back in the day when it was illegal, but this lesson is for lots of stuff. And it was a certain place that I dredged that, I went down, and there was loose sand and gravel, and then there was a little hard pan, a little hard packed area, and then below that there was more gravel and dirt and clay, and then eventually real bedrock. And a couple of times I went through there and I go, oh, there's gold on the little hard pan, and then I went down to bedrock and it was 10 times more work. The hard pan was only down 8 inches or a foot, but the bedrock was down another 2-3 feet, and it was full of boulders and stuff. And when I went down there, I ended up hardly getting any gold on the actual bedrock. The most of the gold that I got in that area was on that hard pan surface. And so I learned that I could just dredge down the 8, 10, 12 inches to the hard pan, clean off the hard pan real good, and then just spread my hole out and clean off more of the hard pan. And by doing that, I got way more gold. And so there are such a thing as false bedrock, and being able to recognize false bedrock and work it if it's, like I was saying, now sometimes when you go down to the real bedrock, there's a lot more gold on real bedrock than on the false bedrock. But it's not always that way. And sometimes there's as much gold, or even like I say, in my situation, dredging, more gold on the false bedrock. So, you got to recognize those false layers. Another thing that has happened along that line is I've been to places in Nevada where there's gold-bearing gravels, but the gravels are like 30 or 40 feet deep. The old timers put shafts down. And I'm not going to go in there and dig a 30-foot shaft to go down to the bedrock. But some of the old timers did. and they would go down and pull their material up. And once they got to bedrock, then they would spread out and mine along the bedrock. But these holes, they did a number of them, testing down to her. And of course, on holes like this, the last material out of the shaft as it was going down goes on top of the pile, right? It comes up. And they would find, and they didn't recognize, there was false bedrock areas down close to the real bedrock. And, like my dredging, maybe a foot or 2 or 3 or 4 feet above the real bedrock. And when they mined, they would take the 3 feet or 4 feet or whatever on the bedrock, but anything above that just went out on their spoil pile. And I went out with my metal detector and went around on their spoil piles, and guess what? There was nuggets all over the place because there was false bedrock, and they were throwing it out on their spoil pile and not recognizing the false bedrock. And so there's a trip for, something a tip that you can use, that you can go out and you see these holes like this where they've gone down to bedrock. Check around the spoil pile because there may be some good nuggets there. And they didn't recognize the false bedrock, and so they threw it on their spoil pile. False bedrock is a real thing. And there's also situations where another one is aeolian placers. These are what they call wind-blown or desert-type placers. They only occur in desert areas, so if you're working in a forest and lots of greenery, it doesn't happen. And it has to be comparatively level. I mean, it can't be like the side of a hill, but if it's, comparatively level, then you'll get this formation of what they call an aeolian placer. The rain and the wind will wash, because it's fairly flat, it will wash gently off the material, off the surface, and it will leave things behind on the surface that won't weather or won't be destroyed by, long-term weathering on the surface. Well, most rocks will weather and decompose into clays and sands and stuff like that and can get washed away. But like when I went to Australia, there was chunks of ironstone on the surface in places. And even though there wasn't a lot of ironstone in the rock, the ironstone landed on the surface. I've been places in Nevada and elsewhere where quartz is on the surface because quartz won't weather. It will just basically stay a chunk of quartz. But gold doesn't weather either. And so what happens with these things is you actually get a concentration of gold near the surface. And Australia is full of places like that, but I've had plenty of places like this in Nevada, in Arizona, and elsewhere where the gold is literally concentrated on the surface. And sometimes these guys in some of these places will scrape with a dozer off, and they scrape down 8 or 10 inches, and then suddenly they're not getting any gold because it's concentrated on the surface. So there's another thing, don't try digging down to bedrock or scraping off with a bulldozer because the gold is concentrated on the surface in these kinds of places. Another one that's related to this, gold always on the bedrock, is actually places where gold is on the bedrock, but the bedrock is weathered. And so I've been to places where you dig down and it's hard to tell when the gravel ends and the bedrock starts because the bedrock is so weathered. And the gravel's weathered too. And so, really there's just a minor texture change when you go from being on bedrock to being into the bedrock. And I've seen people with these weathered bedrock things, they're going down to bedrock, but they're looking for a bedrock that's like hard. They're used to digging through gravels. You dig down on the gravel and you hit a hard, solid bedrock. And that's the end, right? There's no more gravels because you hit hard bedrock. Well, in places where the bedrock's all weathered, you go down, it's still soft. You keep going down, it's still soft. You keep going down. Eventually it starts getting a little harder and a little harder, but there is no junction of loose gravel, hard bedrock underneath it because the bedrock's all weathered. So observe, keep your eyes open, know where you're at. Are you at an aeolian type placer desert condition? Are you at a place where the bedrock is all weathered? And so once you go down beyond a certain place, you're just digging weathered bedrock. You're not digging any gravel that's going to have gold. Recognize false bedrocks when you're the false bedrock, like layer of clay, hard pack, that kind of thing, that where the gold's gonna settle on and stay there. That way, when you encounter these conditions, you'll know, because gold is often on bedrock, but not always. There's definitely situations where it's not, and knowing and observing can find you more gold. Okay, number 3 is always follow the black sand or the quartz or the red dirt. Indicators can be very helpful, and I see guys want to know more about indicators, and that's really great. Indicators can be helpful, but there's no such thing as a universal indicator that always works, will always find you gold. And so if you follow the black sand, you're always going to get gold, because it doesn't work like that. There are places where there's gold and there's loads of black sand. There are places where there's gold and there's very little black sand, sometimes almost none. There are places where there's quartz and there's gold, and places where there's almost no quartz and yet gold. So the way it works with these indicators is, if you find placer gold, you usually will find black sand with it. But if you find black sand, that doesn't mean you're going to find gold. And same with quartz. If you find gold, you're usually going to find hard rock gold. You're going to find quartz with it. But if you find quartz, you're not usually going to find gold. Because it works in the same with red dirt, okay? Red dirt. If you find red dirt, you find gold, and you can find sometimes in the desert areas red dirt associated with the gold. But if you just find red dirt some other place, that doesn't mean you're going to find gold. There's lots of indicators. Galena, there's places where galena is a good indicator in a hard rock vein. If you find galena, good chance you're going to find gold in those places. But the problem with indicators is they don't always work, and they often don't work in reverse. So if you find gold, you find quartz in a hard rock system, but if you find quartz, it doesn't mean you're going to find gold. If you find black sand, it doesn't mean you're going to find gold. But often if you're panning, you're going to find, if you find gold, you do find black sand with it. You need to know what indicators are going to work in your area. And so if you're looking at hard rock and you're looking at quartz, well, maybe just the fact that there's a quartz vein isn't going to tell you that there's. You're going to have to test. You're going to have to do the sampling to see that whether there's gold there or not. And so always following the black sand or the quartz or whatever doesn't always work. One of the things that following black sand that sometimes you see written about, in magazines or something, books, not my book, is that if you take your metal detector and you set it up to find mineralization, you can follow the black sand to the gold. If you've ever read that, I got to tell you, that virtually never works. I've seen people who are very experienced metal detectives who found a lot of gold try to make that work and fail. And the reason is because your metal detector sounds off to all different kinds of mineralization. Some of it's black sand associated with quartz. Some of it's just rocks that are unevenly mineralized, or maybe they have more iron in the rock than is normal in that area. And so your metal detector can find all kinds of mineralization in hot rocks. Some of it might be due to black sand associated with gold, but most of it isn't. And it's really hard to make that work. I'm sure someplace somebody's going to, comment, "Oh, well, old Joe told me he made that work." And well, maybe someplace old Joe found a place that worked, but 99.99% of the time, that technique doesn't work. And so, always following the indicators. Know what indicators work in your area. Indicators can be helpful, but they can also, there's not a universal indicator. So, what works in one place isn't going to work in another. So they can be helpful in some places, but not helpful in others. Our number 4 indicator is you need your own claim in order to find gold. And, I get contacted by guys regularly. In fact, I just got one less than a week ago, 3, 4, 5 days ago, who was talking about buying his own claim. And, if I bought a claim here, and he actually named a place, if I bought a claim here, you think I'd have success? And it's like, okay, You don't need your own claim to find gold. And I always, and a lot of times people don't listen to me, but I always recommend, if you're a new guy, don't start out by buying a claim for yourself. That's a recipe for disaster. Why? Because like selling stuff, people they say, oh yeah, there's loads of gold here, because they're selling it to you. And you might go out and find there's almost no gold here. But the seller says, oh yeah, it's great. You're never going to get the seller come to you and say, hey, there's almost no gold here. You should pay me $10,000 for this claim with almost no gold. That isn't going to happen. The seller always, has a more positive view. The old saying, let the buyer beware. Because if you're going to have any interest in buying claim, get the experience first. Learn the ropes of prospecting. Learn how to find gold. If you have the skill to go out to a claim and evaluate it for yourself and know in your own mind whether it's good or not, because you've got enough experience in good and bad places, you've done enough prospecting for years that and you can go out and check the claim. You don't need to care what the owner says. And if the owner won't let you test or do anything, that tells you what you need to know. You don't want that claim. Because if you know what you're doing and you test it and you find there's no gold, you're not going to want to buy it. So the owner is going to say, no, don't test it, because, well, he'll say, because there's so much gold and you'll get gold, Anyway, you don't buy a claim unless you have the skills to test it for yourself. What I recommend for new guys, what's the alternative, is there are places actually out there where you can prospect for free. There are set aside areas. There's some in California. There's some in other states. I know some in Colorado that you can go out and dig for yourself. The better way even is to join a prospecting club. There's prospecting clubs all over. Many of them have claims or otherwise access to private property that allows the members of the club to go out there and look. And that's how you can go out and find some gold for yourself and have a chance to be in an area where you're not going to get in trouble. And the other benefit of clubs is there's often guys in there who have more experience. And if you're new, you can talk to them and say, hey, can I watch you, or can I talk to you about it? I'm kind of new. I want to learn. And usually they can be very helpful. So, it's an opportunity for you to learn in addition to have access to a claim. So you don't need your own claim. And the other thing is there are some areas out there that are unclaimed. But that's a whole thing in itself of learning how to do claim research. And, I don't recommend that to new guys either. But once you've got the skills, if you've learned how to do research, I have an area in Nevada that there's a nice looking mine. They did some decent amount of work on it. It looks like there's open stopes on the surface, which means the old timers found ore that they, removed to have processed, and it's unclaimed. And it's in a district that's known for coarse gold in the ores. That they had ores where there were, ounces of gold per pound of rock. And so I need to get out there and evaluate that property and see if I want to stake a claim out there. But there are a few places like that. There's some places in hydraulic workings in California that are open. So most of them are closed. Most of them have claims on them, but it's not universal. And once you've learned how to do claim research, then you can do that kind of research for yourself. But you don't need your own claim to go out and find gold. And number 5. Gold is always on the inside bend or behind boulders. And again, this is one of those indicator related ones that works sometimes, and there's times when it doesn't. The inside bends and behind boulders, it's complicated. It's not as simple as most new guys assume it to be, or even experienced guys. There can be bedrock that's hidden that influences it when it's under a flood. One of the things that people don't take into consideration is that, when you get there in summertime and the water's nice and trickling along and it's inviting and kids would want to play in it and stuff like that, when you see that, that's not when gold is moving. No gold is moving at that time. Gold is moving when there's big floods and, water flying all over the place. And, let me show you some pictures and some diagrams to kind of explain about how gold lays in behind inside bends and boulders and during floods and that kind of stuff.
So the first thing to keep in mind is that when you're trying to read a river and figure out where the gold is going to deposit, where it's going to lay down, is that gold is moving when the river looks like this. It's not moving when you come in the summertime and there's a pretty trickle coming down the way. It's when it's moving like this, the river is moving like a freight train, and there's big boulders moving along, and some of the boulders you might be looking behind in nicer weather were rolling all over and couldn't accumulate anything behind them. So you got to think about what the river looks like when it's at super flood stage, because that's when the gold is moving. Here's a diagram that shows how kind of complex the inside bend thing is. This is a model that was made by the Canadian Geological Survey, and it's a model of a river to show how different size bends or different sharpness of bends change where the gold is going to deposit. And in the diagram on the lower part, the black is where the gold would deposit. And so on number 1 on the right side, you see a gentle bend. You see one small accumulation of gold, and it's always on the downstream side. Too many guys look right at the apex of the curve or not far enough on the downstream side, and they don't find anything. Number 2, you have a little bit sharper turn, and you have a little bit longer, but you'll note that it sticks out into the water a little bit, the pay streak does. And on number 3, you have a very sharp turn, and the gold deposit sticks way out into the river. On 4, you have another gentle one, and it hangs in close. On 5 and 6, they had some sort of dike or obstruction sticking out into the stream, and you got a deposit on both sides of that. And then 7 and 8, you have a turn on a bend, but you have also at the mouth of a tributary stream. That's another place where you get an accumulation. And then downstream, they have an island. It's kind of like a big obstruction. A big rock would do the same thing. And 11 shows where you have a complex turn where the gold would accumulate. And sometimes turns are complex, and they can confuse guys, and they dig and don't find anything and get discouraged.
The next mistake, number 6, is if at first you don't succeed, well, just give up. And this is a kind of a joke, but it's what I see a lot of guys do. It kind of goes with the sampling. Sampling is work. Sampling is hard. Sampling is, it's uncertainty because you don't know what your sample results are going to be. And a lot of guys, they'll pick a place, dig there, doesn't work out. Well, I'm never coming back again. And I got to tell you, I've been to places where the first few times that I went there, I got almost nothing or nothing at all. And because I thought, this place has potential. It looks okay. I didn't get any gold, but it looks okay. And I've come back, and, after the second or third trip, I do pretty well. In fact, one of the places that I did that with, that the first couple of times I went there, I got nothing, metal detecting. I eventually came back and found ounces and ounces of gold. It just took persistence. And so one of the things that kind of goes with this about, hanging in there and being persistent is to enjoy the ride. Enjoy being out there. You're out in the woods or out in the desert. You're off, it's quiet. It's nice. Enjoy the time. Enjoy the ride. Eat nice food, get full rest, and that kind of stuff, and be at peace in your own mind. Don't frustrate yourself saying, I've got to get gold, I got to do this. Don't tense yourself up. Don't stress yourself out. Relax. Enjoy the ride. Be persistent. Find the gold. And that's the right mindset to go out there and be prospecting. And, eventually you'll get into success. Have confidence that in time you will be successful. My next common mistake is if you find a good place, never go anywhere else. And I gotta say, I've seen a number of experienced guys who've had some success with prospecting have this mistake knock them completely out of the game. I mean, they stop prospecting, they stop doing anything, they just give up. And the problem is that, you find a good place, hey, that's great. Go there again and again and clean it out good. And, if you clean an immediate area out, well then, spread out. See if there's some more, good areas in that general area. And, use a good technique and have a good attitude and that kind of stuff. But the problem is a lot of guys that they have success, they keep going back to an area, and maybe they will find a satellite area or two that has decent gold, but gold doesn't grow back. In my garden, there's always weeds, and I pull them out, but the weeds grow back. My lawn, I mow my lawn, and, a week or so later, I need to mow it again because it grows back. But the gold doesn't grow back. You go out there, you find a good spot, you clean it out real good, you get all the gold, it's great, you're happy about it, but you can keep detecting that same spot or keep digging in that same area and it's not going to get good again. It's not like you're going to go back out there in a year and suddenly that area where you dug or that area where you detected is all going to be full of gold again. It's not like weeds. It doesn't grow back. Now, in some cases along rivers and streams, if you have a big flood, like some of the stuff I showed you earlier, if you have a big flood, you can kind of reload crevices and reform pay streaks. And I've certainly seen that happen when you have a big flood. Move a lot of gold around and reform pay streaks. So in a sense, that does happen. But in a lot of areas where you've got gravel deposited and it's not actually in an active stream or a river, it doesn't grow back. It's been put there 1,000 years ago or more, and it's going to take another 1,000-year flood to put the gold back there. Or if it's in the desert, it's going to take thousands of years to weather and wash and move material around. So one of the things about this is clean the place out. Absolutely. I'm not saying don't go back to a place that has good gold. Clean it all out, but then be willing to move on and explore. Part of prospecting is getting out and exploring, seeing new places, doing some research, finding some new areas that you want to find out about and visit and explore and see if there's good gold there too. The image of the old-time prospector is some guy and his mule wandering through the desert or through the mountains. And, the truth of that is being a prospector means getting out to explore. When you find a good spot, mine it, take it up, get the gold out. But unless you're in an active stream and there's been a huge flood, it's not going to grow back. So what guys have to do is they go back to that same place and they're not getting any gold, and they go through a long period of time where they're not getting anything and they get really discouraged. They don't go out and explore new places, and then eventually they give up. So don't let that be you. When you find a good place, clean it out. But once it's clean, go find another place. You had the skill to find it the first time. You can go out and find a new place again by exploring. But exploring is tough. Exploring isn't easy. And so, people will sometimes give up rather than go through the difficulty of exploring and sampling and doing all kinds of stuff to find a new deposit of gold. It's just work. And so be willing to do that. Don't give up. Okay, number 8. You need to hike in a mile or more to find good gold. And a lot of people, and actually people will ignore close-in spots in order to hike further in, because that's what you need to do to find good gold, right? And the truth is, the places near roads do kind of get hit more often, sort of. But I will tell you that the biggest nugget I've ever found was right in a road that I'd probably driven over 30 times before I found that nugget in the road. The second biggest nugget I've ever found was within 40 or so feet of a well-traveled road that vacationers are on regularly. And even my biggest nugget this year, 2025, my biggest nugget so far, it's close to 6 grams. And that was found within about 60 feet of a well-traveled road. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you've got to hike in a long ways in order to find gold. And so you shouldn't necessarily ignore places that are relatively close to roads or even in the road. In the road is a tough place to detect because there's often lots and lots and lots of trash. But there's gold there. And so if you understand it and you know what to do, there's gold to be found. And so you don't need to hike in a mile to find gold. And don't ignore those places that are close to a road necessarily just because they seem too close in for you. And I've had guys also tell me, I can't hike around like I used to. I can't hike in a mile, and so I can't go out and prospect. Well, I just gave you examples of some of the best gold I've gotten has been close to the road. I had another patch that I probably got, 50 nuggets out of that, and they were small. They were half gram size. Nothing spectacular, but I probably got 50 of them, and they were within 30 or 40 feet of a well-traveled road. So, just saying that you need to hike a long ways is not a good thing, and ignoring spots that look good otherwise but are close to a road just because they're close to a road, that's not a good idea. So don't make that mistake. Okay, so number 9, you already know all you need to know about prospecting. And I have had guys tell me this, not in so many words, but basically, yeah, I know what I need to know. I don't need to learn anymore. And, success in prospecting is about what you know. Just going out there and, you throw your pick in the air and wherever it lands, dig there. Nobody does that. It's what you know, what you see, what you recognize when you're out in the field. And, look, I've been doing this for well over 40 years. I have a college degree. I wrote for a magazine about prospecting for almost 20 years. And I still learn new stuff, okay? I've studied, I've read, I still learn new things. And, there's no end to the learning. And, if you learn more, you can do better. And if you decide you already know all there is to know, then whatever other new things are out there, you just won't get the benefit of that. So if you want success in prospecting, be willing to learn. There's no such thing as somebody who's learned it all. There's always new equipment, new techniques, new things being learned in geology, and even just new experiences. One of the things that I think are my strength in as far as knowing is I've been to so many different places. I've found gold in Australia. I've found gold, been twice to West Africa, been a number of times to Alaska, hunted all over Nevada and California, in deserts, in mountains, in Arizona, and other places. And so, I've been to so many different kinds of places. That level of experience, gets me better. It helps me, and I don't know it all. I know some. I've been in a lot of places and had a lot of experiences, and that makes me a better prospector. And so learn more, explore more, find out more, always seek knowledge and grow as a person and grow as a prospector. And so, never tell yourself that you know what you need to know, because there's always more to be learned. And if you know more, your chances of success are better. And finally, wherever you go, keep your eyes open. Look and see if you're in gold country or silver or platinum country. If you're out in some place where there's something interesting to be found, keep your eyes open. I have a great story about some guys who were out metal detecting. One of them knew about a kind of a hidden old-timer placer area that was in the forest, and they spent a long time looking for this thing. They eventually found it, and they got some gold out of it. But one of the days, there was no road to it. It was a decent hike in from the nearest road. one of the days that they were doing, one of the guys just ran his metal detector all the way back to the car. And getting back to the car, he kind of looked in the ground, looked good, and they found a huge patch and literally took out pounds of gold out of that area. And it was because the guy was metal detecting on the way back to the truck. And this, I've seen the same things, and I know other friends who've done it, is by metal detecting and keeping your eyes open and looking for stuff. They have had success, even when they weren't heavily doing prospecting, they're just walking back to your vehicle. There's always a chance, and if you're paying attention, you can observe. You might observe some gravels exposed in an area that is gold bearing. Well, hey, nobody's ever sampled those. I better check that out. Or like I say, you might be metal detecting back to your vehicle and run across a patch of nuggets. What goes with this is to think about things. I've done this a lot of times where, I go out, I prospect, I have some level of success, but when I'm back home, maybe a few days later, I'm thinking about, okay, what did I see when I was out there? What makes sense for, the prospecting that I'm doing? What did I see? And that kind of leads me to finding more areas to prospect, or more areas where there's going to be gold, because I was observant and thought about it afterwards. You can think about it and maybe look on Google Earth where you were and that kind of stuff. And so keep your eyes open. If you turn yourself off and you stop thinking about it, and as soon as you leave or you're even getting ready to leave from your prospecting day, you stop thinking about it, and you're thinking about other stuff, you can cost yourself some gold finds by just not keeping your eyes open and being observant to the world around you, because there's clues to be had, and you got to keep your eyes open to see the clues for where the gold is. Now, wherever you go, like I've said with this, the more you know, the more you understand, the more mistakes you avoid, the better your success chances are going to be. And in order to impart to you my 4 decades plus of prospecting experience and my mining degree and that kind of stuff, I wrote a book. It's called Fistful of Gold, and it's available, and I think it's been helpful. I've sold many thousands of copies and had a lot of comments from guys about how much they enjoyed the book and how much it helped them. And I also have partnered with an outfit called High Plains. That's a full line prospecting equipment shop, mail order. And they sell everything from a simple gold pan to sluice boxes, metal detectors, all the way up to top of the line, super expensive detectors. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book, Fistful of Gold, and about High Plains right now. This is my book, Fistful of Gold. It's an encyclopedia of everything you need to know to go out and find gold for yourself. It distills down my 45 years of experience out in the field prospecting, as well as my degree in mine engineering. It's, like I say, an encyclopedia. There's a lot to it. It's over 250,000 words long, hundreds of pages with hundreds of illustrations, teaching you what you need to know about geology, about mining districts, about techniques of finding gold. It covers metal detectors, sluicing, panning, dry washing, high bankers, you name it, it's covered in there. It talks some about platinum and diamonds, but it's mostly about gold, because gold is more widespread. It is not so much a book about where to find gold, but a book about how to find gold. Because even if you have a location where gold was mined in the past and you go out there, well, where should you look to be successful in your prospecting, to find the gold that's there? This is the book that's going to tell you that information. I spent most of 10 years writing this book, so I thought a long time about it. It's got, like I say, lots of information. and lots of illustrations, and I've had results from people who bought it. It's available on Amazon, but I recommend buying it through High Plains Prospectors, and I'll put a link in the description for buying this book through them. They have a better price than Amazon, and I have a special deal that I'll tell you a little bit more about, where you can get a 5% discount from the price even with that. On Amazon, the book rates a 4.7 out of 5, which means that of all the people that have bought it, they've been really highly satisfied, and I think you, if you buy my book, will be just as highly satisfied as well. Now let's talk a little bit more about High Plains Prospectors. They're a prospecting shop, a mail order prospecting shop that I've partnered with. The deal is that I can get you a 5% discount, a coupon code, and I'm going to put the code to that right here. It's just Chris Ralph, all caps with no space between Chris and Ralph. You put that in there as a discount code, and you'll get 5% off their already really good prices. I think it's a great deal where you win by getting a discount. I get a little percentage of that, and they get new business. So if you need prospecting supplies, High Plains is really the way to go. And I'll put information, like I say, in the description more about how you can work with them, because I'm working with them. They really are great guys, a great company. For even more information, I also have a website, and I'm going to show you my webpage and talk a little bit more about that right now.
This is my webpage. It's located at NevadaOutbackGems.com. You can Google it, or I have a link down in the description below. But there's lots of information here, miscellaneous stuff, pictures, some historic information as well, stories. It's got a lot of great fun stuff. You'll probably be interested in it.
Now, on all of my YouTube videos, I encourage you guys to ask questions. If you have thoughts, comments, suggestions for things that I ought to look at in my videos, things that you want to find out more about, and I answer 100% of my questions. There's not very many YouTubers out there that answer 100% of their questions. I'm one of the few. And so I will do my best to answer what you have. I mean, I only can write so much. Sometimes the answer is something where I'm going to recommend that you buy the book and read about it. I also ask that you subscribe to my channel, click the bell notification so that every time I come out with a new video, you'll be able to watch it. And like I say, I cover a huge amount of topics. I also have 250 videos that I've already done. And so you can go back through my catalog of videos on YouTube. I'm sure there'll be many videos there that you'll want to take a look at, especially if you have any interest in gold or platinum, diamonds, gemstones, geology, and that sort of stuff. My YouTube site is going to be right up your alley. So I'll see you again real soon. We'll be out in the field and back in the office at the whiteboard, and whether we're looking at gold or platinum, diamonds, gemstones, or other interesting geology, it's going to be fun. You're going to enjoy it, and we'll see you again real soon.